Hey there! Welcome to part 2 of my top 10 favorite James Bond movies. If you're here and you haven't seen part 1 yet, I highly recommend starting with that video before continuing on. I've left a link to the video in the description. Don't worry, I'll still be here when you're ready. For the rest of you, I won't waste any time here. Let's get right into it. Now, if you're more of a casual Bond fan watching this, you're probably thinking, really? This one? The only one that George Lazenby did? Where Bond wears a kilt? Speaks via someone else's voiceover for a good portion of it?
Genealogy is all about ancestors and families.
And with that depressing ending? Well, yeah, it's no secret that this movie is sort of the black sheep of the franchise. As I said earlier, this was the only Bond movie that George Lazenby did, and was followed up with another Sean Connery movie. It was not well received at the time. However, I think somewhere in the last 10 to 20, maybe 30 years, thanks to TV broadcasts around Thanksgiving and Christmas, this movie's strengths really began to shine through, and it would gain the respect that it deserved. In this one, James Bond decided to go rogue, going over M's orders, to track down and take down Ernst Stavro Blofeld after facing Spectre over the course of the previous 5 movies. To do this, Bond makes a deal with the head of another crime organization, with Marc-Ange Draco, head of the Union Corse. Earlier in the movie, Bond had rescued Draco's daughter, Teresa de Vincenzo, or Tracy, twice. Once by preventing her from drowning herself in the ocean, and the second time when she intentionally made a bet and lost, claiming to be unable to pay it. Draco believes Tracy needs a man like Bond, and has information on Blofeld that Bond needs. He makes a deal with Bond that he'll give the information only if Bond will marry Tracy. Bond agrees, but finds that both he and Tracy are, in fact, falling in love with each other. Bond discovers that Blofeld is working with the London College of Arms to claim the title of Comte Balthazar de Beauchamp, a French form of Blofeld. When Bond presents this info as a solid lead to M, his superior grants Bond the mission. Bond decides to pose as Sir Hilary Bray, the genealogist that Blofeld had not met but corresponded with. With just the mission of capturing Blofeld, Bond heads right into Blofeld's base of operations, with no idea of the plot that Blofeld is hatching against the entire world and Bond himself. This movie is actually a solid adaptation of the original novel, with a few creative liberties thrown in, but as we've seen on this list, sometimes the movie does it a little better than the source material. Here, the additions give Bond more of a personal stake in the climax of the movie. It does create one glaring plot hole for the movie when Bond's cover is blown, and he and Blofeld are face to face. Bond and Blofeld had finally met on screen in the previous movie, You Only Live Twice. How Blofeld would miss Bond makes him seem careless. This was actually an error on the planning stage. Majesties was supposed to follow Thunderball, but a warm winter in Switzerland caused You Only Live Twice to be made first. Despite that, the changes do help make Tracy more of an awesome character, which segues me to talking about her. For the first time in the series, we get to see a Bond girl that legitimately has Bond fall in love with her. Remember, we didn't see Vesper on screen until 2006, if you didn't count the 1950s Climax TV adaptation, or the 1967 parody Casino Royale, which I don't. She begins rough with a devil-may-care attitude, but we learn from her father that she was like this because of a lost husband who killed himself with one of his mistresses. She's reckless, bold, and strong in her ways. Once she falls in love with Bond, however, we see a strong evolution in her. She actually saves Bond and is the driver in an epic car chase in the snowy Alps. She may also be one of the only Bond girls to not only take out a henchman, but trick the main villain as well, pretending to fall in love with Blofeld to prevent him from seeing her father's helicopters approaching his base. We, as the audience, truly see why this was the one woman for James Bond, which makes the final scene with her that much more wrenching. It certainly helps that the producers got the legendary Diana Rigg to play her. I'll be honest, on my first viewing of this movie, I didn't think much of George Lazenby as James Bond. Sure, he portrayed the action side of James Bond correctly. I mean, in fact, George did study Jeet Kune Do under Bruce Lee until Lee's death in 1973. Up to this movie, however, George was more of a male model and chocolate bar spokesman and less of an actor. In some scenes, it shows.
Well, Tracy, next time play it safe and stand on 5.
People who want to stay alive play it safe.
Please stay alive. At least for tonight.
Takes more than a few props to turn 007 into a herald.
It'll take more than cutting off your earlobes, Blofeld, to turn you into a count.
After several repeated viewings, though, his bond began to grow on me. The scenes between him and Tracy are some of the most touching performances in all of the Bond franchise.
Tracy, an agent shouldn't be concerned with anything but himself.
I understand. We just have to go on the way we are.
We'll have to find something else to do.
Are you sure, Jane?
I love you. I know I'll never find another girl like you. Will you marry me?
You mean it?
I mean it.
While a little rough around the edges though, I have to agree with Albert R. Broccoli in thinking that had he stayed in the role for a while, he really could have made a bigger impact as James Bond. But seriously, why was he dubbed for half of this movie? Could he not get the voice right?
You gave a very accurate description.
And how could I not mention the direction of Peter Hunt? Hunt had been with Bond since the beginning, working as an editor on the first 4 movies and getting moved up to second unit director on You Only Live Twice. When Lewis Gilbert passed on returning in the directing chair, Peter Hunt took his chance to fill in. What makes this movie so remarkable in all of Bond is its unique style. Hunt created the style of how action was filmed in the previous movies with quick cuts. Here, he uses that technique in the fullest. And while it can be a little hard to follow at times, hey, much better than Quantum of Solace's frantic camera work, it does convey the sense of suspense each fight brings for the characters. Hunt also makes full use of disorienting the audience with psychedelic visuals to convey Blofeld's brainwashing of the girls at Peace Gloria.
I will tell you again. I will tell you how.
Why he didn't return for Diamonds Are Forever is anyone's guess. Maybe the poor reception of this one scared him off, but many today claim that he was ahead of his time. And I have to agree with them. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention one of the best settings for a Bond movie, Peace Gloria itself. Not only is it a beautiful set for Blofeld's lair, but unlike many of the fantastical lairs in the movies, this one is a real place you can visit. It is a revolving restaurant at the summit of, and I'm sorry if I butcher the pronunciation, the Schlitthorn in Switzerland. Actually built in 1969 and still in operation to this day. Unsurprisingly, it also has an exhibit called the 007 Walk of Fame. Yes, I am planning a trip there for me and my wife. I told her I'd even wear George Lazenby's kilt, but I digress. If you're looking for a fun, exciting, but heart-touching Bond movie, you really can't go wrong with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Hey, it's also the Christmas Bond movie.
Merry Christmas, 007.
Merry Christmas.
There are many Bond fans worldwide that consider this one as the Bond movie. As the third Bond movie, this one was the one that secured James Bond into a pop culture icon and defined 007 as what a cinematic secret agent should be. Mostly, but I'll get to that. This is the one that generated all the tropes that we know and love. Bond girl with a ridiculously provocative name?
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
Check. Gadget-filled cool car?
Eject a seat, you're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
Check. A memorable villain with a psychotic obsession?
This is gold, Mr. Bond. All my life I've been in love with its color, its brilliance, its divine heaviness.
Check. It's also got the most prominent torture scene in the series with one of the best exchanges.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Another fun fact, Sean Connery is not acting here. That laser was an effect with the flame under the table. Real, meaning if the guy under the table wasn't careful, Connery would have fried his double O's. In this movie, Bond is sent after Auric Goldfinger under charges of international gold smuggling. What follows is a back and forth between the two as Bond finds out what Goldfinger is really up to. Bond stops Goldfinger cheating, so Goldfinger has Bond knocked out and his associate killed by gold paint. Don't worry, completely fictional way to die. Bond plays Goldfinger at golf, and when Goldfinger attempts to cheat, Bond tricks him into forfeiting the match.
You play as Schlesinger 1, don't you?
Yes, why?
This is Licensure 7. Here's my Penfold Hearts. You must have played the wrong ball somewhere on the 18th fairway. We are playing strict rules, so I'm afraid you lose the hole and the match.
Goldfinger warns Bond by demonstrating what his manservant Oddjob can do with the steel-rimmed hat. And this is all just the beginning. This is another one of the movies that adapted the original material, but like Majesty's, it improves it. The best change is Goldfinger's plot itself. In the book, and as Bond suspects in the movie, Goldfinger simply wants to steal all the gold from Fort Knox. The movie even points out how ludicrous this plan is.
$15 billion in gold bullion weighs 10,500 tons. 60 men would take 12 days to load it onto 200 trucks. Now, at the most, you're going to have 2 hours before the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines move in and make you put it back.
Who mentioned anything about removing it?
His government's given you a bomb.
I prefer to call it an atomic device. It's small, but particularly dirty.
Cobalt and iodine?
Precisely.
Well, if you explode it in Fort Knox, the entire gold supply of the United States will be radioactive for 57 years.
58 to be exact.
I apologize, Goldfinger. It's an inspired deal.
Yep, the plan of the movie really makes Goldfinger out to be a clever villain instead of just a rich madman. What makes Goldfinger essential is not only what I listed earlier, but it's also just fun to watch. Sean Connery gives, in my opinion, his best performance as James Bond in this movie. His confidence is at an all-time high, even during some of the sillier moments of this movie. Could any of the other Bonds take off their wetsuit to reveal a white tuxedo underneath without a giggle? I don't think so. Some of the best moments in these movies is when Bond and the villain meet and Bond does something to humiliate them immediately.
Now hear this, Goldfinger. Your luck has just changed. I doubt very much if the Miami Beach police would take kindly to what you're doing. Nod your head if you agree. Nod. Good. Now start losing, Goldfinger. Shall we say, $10,000? No, let's be generous. Let's make it 15,000.
Connery does this with such a swagger that you can't help but smile along as Goldfinger gets flustered. That swagger isn't just for that moment, however. Connery is carrying it for the entire movie, whether he's meeting a girl, quipping about gadgets, using said gadgets, or even spying, or even while under duress. We also can't discuss this movie without talking about the title character, Goldfinger, played by Gert Frobbe. Goldfinger is a gold smuggler obsessed with gold, and he'll do anything to get it, or in this case, make his more valuable. This is a character that you'd believe gets his way and has no problem with how he gets it. His workers? Expendable. Heck, he gasses an entire room of potential gangster collaborators and has one shot and crushed when the man decides to back out. His plan to irradiate the gold in Fort Knox with a nuke has some serious repercussions that Goldfinger just shrugs off.
They get what they want, economic chaos in the West, and the value of your gold increases many times.
I conservatively estimate 10 times.
As long as his stock increases, he doesn't care. Gert Frobbe does such an exceptional job portraying this, but remembering to keep a childish charm to him as well. And I want to give a shout out to the guy who dubbed him. Yes, Gert Frobbe as Goldfinger was dubbed in this movie, as the actor didn't speak a whole lot of English. But if I didn't point out to you, could you tell?
You are a clever, resourceful man, Mr. Bond.
Well, thank you.
Perhaps too clever. Twice our paths have crossed. Let's leave it at that.
Goldfinger is not only evil, but joyously evil, and cements his place as one of the greatest Bond villains in the entire series. Speaking of villains, we get another memorable henchman here, in the form of Goldfinger's Korean manservant, Oddjob. He may not be the first resilient villain with a gadget weapon, but everybody knows about his deadly steel-rimmed hat. Oddjob is a character who's extraordinarily loyal to Goldfinger. Not only is he the man's chauffeur, caddy, and bodyguard, but he's willing to be in Fort Knox when the bomb goes off to make sure that Bond doesn't stop it. With a seemingly iron resistance to pain, Bond actually has to get creative to take him out. I've also got to talk about the Bond girl everybody remembers from this film, Pussy Galore. She's the first Bond girl in the series to start out as a villain, but switch to Bond's side. She's tough, no nonsense, and is the leader of her own troop of female pilots, showing a more caring side that Bond can get through to. I'll talk about how he does later. Personally, she's not my favorite, but I can see why many like her.
You can turn off the charm. I'm immune.
Now it's time to address some of the reasons that this is just number 4 in my list. The movie does have one pacing problem. From the beginning up to Bond's laser experience, the movie keeps me hooked. But between that point to the raid on Fort Knox, the movie begins to drag with a few odd choices. I've mentioned it earlier, but I think it bears repeating. There's a scene where Bond is imprisoned, and from there, he spies on a meeting between Goldfinger and some mobsters who have helped him with his scheme. Goldfinger lays out the entirety of Operation Grand Slam, or at least what we and Bond think it is at this point. When one of the hoods declines the plan, Goldfinger has him paid and sent off, but then gasses the others to death? What was the point of going through that elaborate walkthrough if he was just gonna off them anyway? What's more odd is the fate of the guy who walked out. Goldfinger has Oddjob shoot the guy. The scene could have just ended there, but for some reason the movie just feels the need for us to watch Oddjob drive the car to the dump and get the car crushed. Sure, it establishes that the homing device that Bond planted on Mr. Solo, the gangster who's crushed, is now kaput, but this sequence goes on for about 5 minutes. It could have been taken out and just explained away by this scene.
Forgive me, Mr. Bond, but I must arrange to separate my gold from the late Mr. Solo.
As you said, he had a pressing engagement.
It is also quite plain that this movie is very much of its time, especially with its attitude toward women. Don't get me wrong, I am not a raging feminist, but I am quite respectful toward the opposite sex. I'm also not saying that James Bond should be a squeaky clean good boy either, especially in his line of work, but I do agree with the major criticism with how Bond turns Pussy Galore to his side. Up to this point, Pussy Galore is shown to be no nonsense and tough, as I said before, so how does Bond convince Pussy Galore to join him? He forces himself upon her.
Now let's both play.
Yeah, to be honest, you're a bit rapey. I mean, I like to swing, but doctor no means no, baby.
No kidding! I'm sure someone could have come up with an alternative solution, but I'm really surprised that that made it to the movie. Again, I don't condone that, and admittedly, it is hard to try to get through that scene when I watch this with my wife. Aside from those complaints, Goldfinger still remains the golden standard of what a James Bond movie should be.
Oh, no, you don't. This is no time to be rescued.
With any Bond actor's first movie, it's difficult to gauge what style that actor's take on Bond will be. It's usually the third movie in the actor's tenure that fully establishes their James Bond. Since Timothy Dalton didn't get that chance, the best that we as the audience got, and my third favorite Bond movie, is License to Kill, a daring, tense, and to this day, the most violent James Bond movie. In this movie, Bond goes rogue after a powerful Colombian drug lord named Fran Sanchez maims Felix Leiter and has Felix's wife murdered. Bond goes full-on 80s action star as he goes on a reckless vendetta to get to Sanchez, infiltrating and tricking him. But along the way, Bond realizes that his actions aren't without consequences and gets help from one of Felix's badass operatives. And Q! Let's talk about Dalton's performance in this movie. In The Living Daylights, he did get to play into his strengths, especially with confrontational scenes, but when the movie had him try to quip like more, it came off a tad awkward. Here, we really see Timothy Dalton's key moments as James Bond. He shows his happiness at Felix's wedding, and gets to portray Bond's remembrance of his own short-lived marriage.
One who catches this is the next one who...
No. Thanks, Stella. It's time I left.
Oh, James. Can I see something wrong?
He was married once, but it was a long time ago.
He also shows how brutal his James Bond can get when it gets personal. Both are key traits to how Ian Fleming wrote the character. Timothy Dalton also brings more of a commanding presence here that wasn't shown in his first outing. There are some who feel that this was way too far for the cinematic Bond, but I disagree. There's a theory that states that the tragic events of the Leiter's attack reopens the pain that Bond felt after losing his wife.
He knew the risks. And his wife?
The director, John Glenn, believed this angle as well. So if you're not really set on this movie, watch it again with this in mind. A lot of Dalton's portrayal will make a lot more sense, especially whenever he loses an ally.
Compliments of Sharky.
Dalton really builds upon what he began with his previous movie, and the humanity and the cruelness of James Bond is on full display here. Like many films in this list, this one also showcases one of the best villains the series has to offer, in Fran Sanchez. Unlike more grandiose bad guys like Hugo Drax from Moonraker or Max Zorin from A View to a Kill, Sanchez is a more realistic baddie. He's the head of his own cartel and basically owns his own city, government included, as the president is under Sanchez's payroll.
You were very quiet when I was arrested. Remember, you're only president for life.
He doesn't really care about world domination, as he's pretty much achieved it in Isthmus City. Sure, you could argue that he's seeking to extend his reach globally, but nothing in his motive suggests reckless endangerment as long as he isn't betrayed. What makes Sanchez compelling is the fact that he's terrifying when angry, smug when he believes he's won, and brutal in his jealousy.
What did he promise you? His heart? Give her his heart.
But he's also got qualities that sometimes makes the audience forget that he's the bad guy. He's hospitable to Bond when he believes that Bond had saved him from an attempt on his life. He has a sense of humor, even if it's twisted.
Hey, no fooling around with my girl.
You kidding? After what you did to that guy on the islands?
You like my little Valentine, huh?
And he has a commendable motto that actor Robert Davi improvised.
Loyalty is more important to me than money.
He's even true to his word when, instead of getting rid of the agent that betrayed Felix, he fully intends to pay the guy and send him on his way. It's his move against Felix and Della that helps keep the audience against him, though. It's also chilling to see how unhinged he gets as Bond dismantles his empire bit by bit, gunning down his own men and desperately using all at his disposal to try to kill James Bond. He also gets one of the most cathartic deaths a Bond villain can have in the series.
You could have had everything.
Don't you want to know why?
That's right, he's finally taken out by the lighter that Felix gifted Bond at his wedding. You cannot get more poetic than that. Let's switch gears to another strength of this movie, James Bond's allies. As this is the first time in the series where Bond goes totally on his own and without Felix to help him, 007 has to get by with what he can. Sure, there's the unfortunately fated fellow friend of Felix, wow, try saying that 5 times fast, Sharky, but the real supporters are CIA informant Pam Bouvier, and as I stated earlier, Q himself.
Remember, if it hadn't been for Q Branch, you'd have been dead long ago.
Bond even gets Sanchez's own girlfriend, Lupe Lamora, to help him, but I'll talk about her in a bit. Starting with Pam, Bond first briefly meets her at Felix's wedding when Bond goes to retrieve his friend from his work. After the attack and Bond's dismissal from MI6, Bond discovers that Pam Bouvier is the only surviving member of Felix's contacts, and he takes Felix's spot to meet her, rescue her from Sanchez's men, and recruit her services for his vendetta. When he arrives, he discovers a woman who ends up outclassing him in the ensuing bar brawl, even providing the escape. When Bond tries to take charge, she actually chews him out.
It's a tough business you picked, Miss Bouvier. Leave it to the professionals.
Look, pal, I was an army pilot. I have flown to the toughest hellholes in South America, and I will not have you lecture me about professionalism.
Sure, she can complain a little in the movie, but she's also there to save Bond a couple more times at the end. As for Q, this movie gets him in the field for the first time, and probably the best if we count Spectre. Of course, Q brings Bond some goodies, but the one that really stands out is the signature camera sniper. This saves Bond's ass when a ninja tries to use it on him. Yes, ninja, don't worry about it. It's also hilarious to see later in the movie Q being a hypocrite.
Right. Now pay attention, 007. I want you to take great care of this equipment. There are 1 or 2 rather special accessories.
Q, have I ever let you down?
Frequently. Bond's just left in convoy. 2 cars and a jeep turning north onto the main highway.
I copy that, Q.
Over now.
Now, of course, no movie is without flaws. This is my number 3 choice after all. It's been stated that this Bond movie feels more like Miami Vice rather than a typical Bond romp. Instead of a number of exotic locations, this movie primarily takes place in the Miami, Mexico area. There's not even really an MI6 scene other than a quick check-in on Moneypenny about 2/5 into the movie. Although I can see this point and it does hold some water, I don't really mind it. Up to this time, this was the 16th Bond movie. There does need to be something distinctive every now and then. Also, M in this movie is kind of a dick, actively and openly being antagonistic toward Bond and his problems, despite everything 007 has done for the service. He even alerts another operative in the area to stop Bond.
This private vendetta of yours could easily compromise Her Majesty's government. You have an assignment, and I expect you to carry it out objectively and professionally.
I can understand that realistically, this would be the case, as M does have a point in saying that Bond's actions could cause some serious backlash on MI6 and possibly the British government as well, but only 2 moments stand out as M's sympathy is shown. After Bond escapes him,
Don't get too many people! God help you, Commander.
and an off-screen report from Felix that M has a job for Bond after he gets his revenge. The third major criticism I have against it is the other Bond girl of this movie, Lupe Lamore, or maybe so her actress, Talisa Soto. The character is just fine, as she's more of a scared captive. It's explained that Sanchez rigged a beauty contest for Lupe to win, and I guess she fell for him after. She's also unfortunately a victim of abuse, and has tried to escape before. When she meets Bond, she just wants to be left alone, as she has just been whipped and her lover murdered. Through the course of the movie, she begins to start subtly helping Bond behind Sanchez's back. Similar to another Fleming book, I guess she sees Bond as her way out. The real problem is Soto's acting.
James, what are you doing back here?
I don't think your being here is a good idea, Lupe.
It's all right. France is having dinner with the Chinese.
Do you know where he's taking me tomorrow?
He's showing them a special place. I don't know where. James, don't go. I'm scared. What's gonna happen to us?
Hey, if she didn't mention it, could you tell that she was frightened? There's plenty to the character, and I just don't want to seem crass, but I think she might have been hired for looks, like many previous Bond women have been. Personally, I did think she got better as she played Katana in the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie.
To win your next match, use the element which brings life.
Speaking of, Shang Tsung's actor, Kari Hiroyuka Tagawa, is in this movie as well.
We're Hong Kong narcotics, you bastard!
Let's get back to License to Kill. I've only got one more minor criticism, and it has to do with the ending. After Sanchez's demise, there is a party at his mansion. Bond is on the phone to inform Felix of what transpired while Felix is recovering.
I'll be up to see you next week. We'll do some fishing.
Good. I'll be out by then. M called.
He tried to reach you. I think he may have a job for you.
Sure, Felix could be glad for what Bond just did for him, but keep in mind, he just lost his wife right after they were married and lost his leg to a shark. He seems pretty chipper for someone who just went through all that. I've also stated before that I don't care for the whole M called thing. It's a tad lazy in my opinion. Despite the shortcomings, License to Kill earns its spot in my top 3 because of its personal story, phenomenal acting by the leads, not counting Lupe, stunts that I failed to mention earlier. Fun fact, they really did drive a Mack truck on one side. Thrilling moments that will have a first-time viewer on the edge of their seat. A fun soundtrack by Michael Kamen. And in my opinion, a strong candidate for best performance by a Bond actor.
Why don't you wait until you're asked?
So why don't you ask me?
If Goldfinger represented what a cinematic James Bond should be, Skyfall perfectly shows the audience who James Bond should be. Skyfall kicks off with Bond seemingly being killed on a mission, only to pick himself back up when London and M are attacked. Bond goes against an ex-MI6 operative, Raul Silva, who, like Bond, was abandoned by M. Now Bond must rebuild himself and do everything that he can to prevent M from being killed by Silva, despite M being responsible for his near-death experience and failure in the opening. You've got to understand where us Bond fans were at the time when this movie came out. It had been 4 years since the disappointing Quantum of Solace. Hilariously, that seems like a short wait with the recent gaps between movies. I can't speak for everyone, but I, who grew up watching Pierce Brosnan in the Tux, was still not convinced at the time that Daniel Craig would be a favorable Bond actor. Sure, we had Bloodstone and the GoldenEye reimagining in 2010 to hold us over, but once again, those were in the vein of Casino Royale and Quantum. Then this movie came out, slapped me in the face, and told me, yeah, this is James Bond. I also want to highlight that this movie was a celebratory film, as it came out on the 50th anniversary of Dr. No, the first Bond movie. Die Another Day had tried this a decade prior, but failed to properly toast 40 years of Bond, with a 2-hour reference fest filled with silly CGI and too many bad puns.
Really? I take it Mr. Bond's been explaining his Big Bang Theory.
Oh, yeah, I think I got the thrust of it.
Skyfall showed how a movie like this should do it. Sure, it has references. Off the top of my head, there's a nice callback to Scaramanga's Funhouse from The Man with the Golden Gun that Die Another Day snuck in as well. Bond uses his Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger, complete with the ejector seat. Heck, the MI6 building even gets blown up and the villain has a personal stake against M, like in The World Is Not Enough. The difference from Die Another Day, however, is that Skyfall focuses more on a compelling story, rather than a cheesy wink to the audience. Now, with what I meant by who James Bond should be, I'm referring to how when the chips are down and even if everything is against him, Bond will rise and see his mission through to the end. Throughout the movie, after the stellar opening credits and theme by Adele, we see Bond doubt himself after failing the beginning mission. He doesn't report back to M that he survived, he lets himself grow a scraggly beard, and he even gets his kicks from the local women in deadly drinking games. It's only after he sees a news report about the attack on MI6 and deaths of fellow agents that Bond returns. He goes through reconditioning and is only let back into the field by M's faith.
Seems you've passed, by the skin of your teeth.
I didn't know Bond passed the tests.
He didn't.
When he goes against Silva, the villain tries to convert Bond by playing upon M's failure on 007. Despite this, Bond presses through and captures Silva. When Silva hacks his way out, Bond chases after him on foot throughout London to prevent Silva from taking out M at her hearing. Bond even takes M to his childhood home in Scotland to try to get one over on Silva and protect her further. Even though he ultimately fails as M was grazed by a bullet and dies anyway, we see that Bond did everything he possibly could have. When we see him take his next assignment at the end of the movie, we know that James Bond has finally returned. Let's talk about another pillar of this movie, the villain, Raul Silva, played exquisitely by Javier Bardem. As with most Bond villains, Silva represents what Bond could have been if Bond had taken M's judgment call over his sense of duty and decided to instead hunt her. Silva has the right atmosphere built around him, as Bond is told by many that he should be scared of Silva, that one cannot hide from him. He doesn't even show up on camera until about halfway through the movie, but when he does, he gets one of the best Bond villain introductions ever, entering the scene via a personal elevator and relaying a metaphorical story to Bond as he walks toward him in one single take. I'm going to link the scene in the description below, as it's a little lengthy. Here, we see that Silva respects Bond, but also shows him who's in charge. When M confronts Silva after his capture and chastises him, we see that he's hurt, but he knows he's going to get the last laugh. He's even prepared with the train to be thrown at Bond when Bond chases him.
I do hope that wasn't for me.
No, but that is.
This movie isn't the first to have Dame Judi Dench have the spotlight. That'd be The World Is Not Enough. But undoubtedly, it's her best performance in the series. Sure, she was the only cast member to survive the reboot, even if this was a different M, but mostly up to this point, she was strictly a supporting character, giving Bond his mission, snarking at him, and generally being his boss. In this movie, she goes through as much development as Bond does, as she must fully rely on him when her past comes back to haunt her. Keep in mind that she's also being hounded by the British government after her failure in the opening. The reason Gareth Mallory is there? He's supervising her, and even he's not on her side from the get-go.
If he says he's ready, he's ready.
Perhaps you can't see it, or maybe you won't.
What exactly are you implying?
You're sentimental about him.
She makes a rash judgment call thinking that Bond can't get the job done, but she gets redemption throughout the movie by giving Bond several chances. Now, it could be argued that M mostly does this out of desperation, as 007 is her only agent not compromised by the opening mission's failure. But whether this is true or not, I think that's entirely up to the viewer. Either way, Dame Judi Dench puts in one hell of a final performance as her M that tops off a beloved run. Spectre doesn't count. As for why Skyfall just misses out on the top spot, I mean, I don't really have many complaints about this movie. I am one of the forgiven fans who can overlook how convenient Silva's plan and escape was, well, just cause
it's too much fun.
I actually like the climax with its Home Alone-esque sequence. It shows just how resilient Bond can be when he's facing overwhelming odds. If I had to gripe about one thing, it would be this character here. Severine, played by, and I apologize if I butcher this name, Bernice Lim Merlot. The problem I have is that we have too little of her in the movie. Severine is first introduced when Bond confronts the man who took the NATO agent list in the beginning. She seems to be working with him until Bond meets her at the casino. The two have fun wordplay, even if Bond doesn't seem to know much about basic female clothing.
Only a certain kind of woman wears a backless dress with a Beretta 70s strapped to her thigh.
Unfortunately, the makers of this film decided to subvert expectations. When she takes Bond to meet Silva on his island, both are immediately captured, and while Bond meets Silva, Severine gets a few new bruises and cuts, and is set up as a target for a sadistic game by Silva.
Let's see. I'm gonna be the first to knock the glass on the head.
And just like that, she's gone. I really do think that she had an excellent setup for potential growth over her fear of Silva, and she and Bond have amazing chemistry. But nope, she's in the movie for about 15 minutes, and then the movie treats her death like a small shame and moves right on. I totally get why this was done though. Story-wise, this is a plot about Bond's loyalty to M, but mainly M's fight to clean up her past and redeem herself. If Severine was the main Bond girl here, that'd take a ton away from M. It's still a shame though. Skyfall didn't just excel because of the leads I listed, but like I stated earlier, this was the movie that re-established the Bond canon back into Daniel Craig's run. In this movie, we get the return of Q, albeit a younger interpretation that works well against Craig's grizzled 007. And by the end of the movie, we have a revealed Moneypenny, a new male M with Mallory, and we're even back in the classic MI6 office. Craig's first two tried to end with an established 007, but this was the movie that said, alright, now James Bond is the Bond you know and love. It's too bad that the following movies in Daniel Craig's tenure couldn't keep up the momentum in my opinion, but I digress. I can agree with most that Casino Royale is the better movie, but to me at least, Skyfall is the best Daniel Craig James Bond movie. So what in the 25 film series is my personal #1 favorite? Yes, it probably comes as no surprise that yet another 90s-born Bond fan loves GoldenEye the most. I'm guessing that you're thinking that it's because of the classic N64 game. To answer that thought, no, not really. But the game did serve as a proper appetizer to the movie's main course, despite being released 2 years later. When I think of what the quintessential James Bond movie is, the one that shows exactly who Bond is and what the series is all about, it's GoldenEye. It's not only an important Bond movie for me, but in the series' history, it was another one that saved the series. Let me explain. License to Kill was released in 1989, summer 1989. Not only were audiences at the time put off by the simplistic revenge plot and increased violence, but it went up against movies like Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, that coincidentally had former Bond Sean Connery as Indy's dad, Ghostbusters 2, and Lethal Weapon 2. Talk about competition! Despite the lower box office return, work began right away on the follow-up just 11 months later. A script was written where Timothy Dalton's Bond would go up against a Chinese technology magnate and fight a robot. There were rewrites, but at the time, a legal battle between MGM and Danjaq, Albert R. Broccoli's company responsible for the copyrights of the Bond series, caused the movie to halt production until 1993 when Dalton's contract expired. Dalton was asked to return, but he only wanted to do one more, and after that long 5-year gap, Broccoli wanted him to do 4 or 5. Timothy Dalton declined, and he was out. Richard Maybaum, who had written most of the Bond movies up to that point, had jumped ship along with John Glenn, who had directed the movies from For Your Eyes Only to License to Kill, and had been with Eon since On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Cubby Broccoli's health was declining as well, so it was up to his daughter, Barbara, and stepson Michael G. Wilson to take up the producing roles. Longtime Bond composer John Barry was not returning either. Not only were the teams behind the camera changing, but times had as well. In the time that Eon was prevented from making the next Bond movie, the Cold War had ended. This had many in the audience scratching their heads about how a Bond movie would work, as the character ever since his conception in 1953 had been a Cold War agent, mostly against Russian forces. Look at most of the John Glenn movies. Bond is usually racing against the USSR for an advantage, or dealing with plots that the USSR in one way or another had a hand in. What was James Bond gonna fight for now? All those worries were put aside when in 1995, James Bond returned with The New Man in the Tux, Pierce Brosnan. The movie was a major success, and the series was revitalized. So what happens in this one? In the movie, Bond has to go against a former friend and previous 006, Alec Trallion, 9 years after completing an infiltration in a Russian chemical factory that had the agents cripple a major Soviet facility, but resulted in the apparent death of 006. Bond has to stop his former friend and his organization, Yanis, from using an EMP satellite codenamed GoldenEye from striking London just after Alec has hacked into the banks and emptied them out. A lot of the movie scenes have newer characters criticizing 007 and questioning his relevance post-Cold War.
For crying out loud, another stiff-ass Brit. Your secret codes and your passwords. One of these days you guys are gonna learn just to drop it.
Judi Dench is introduced as the new M, who in an establishing scene, not only breaks down James Bond and lays down the law, but shows in one line that she trusts Bond in spite of their initial thoughts of each other.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War, whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Point taken.
Not quite, 007. If you think for one moment I don't have the balls to send a man out to die, your instincts are dead wrong. I've no compunction about sending you to your death. But I won't do it on a whim, even with your cavalier attitude towards life. Bond, come back alive.
By the end of the movie, the audience and the world know that yes, Bond is still needed. This movie perfectly exemplifies what the Bond movies are known for. After the sexless and less womanizing from the Dalton era, Brosnan's Bond was back in bed with the babes. The extravagant and over-the-top set pieces were back. Look at Trellion's headquarters. Fun fact, the satellite structure was not invented by the movie makers. This was a real thing. This was the Arecibo Observatory radio telescope in Puerto Rico. Sadly, in 2020, it collapsed, and I don't think it was as spectacularly as in the movie. The only thing I think was missing from the movie was a proper Bond gadget car scene. Yes, the Aston Martin DB5 is used in a race with Xenia on top, more about her later, but the only time we see any gadget usage in it is with a brief profile on Xenia from Moneypenny. This movie decided to swap tradition for a more grandiose chase though. How about a freaking tank through the streets of St. Petersburg? Obviously, we can't talk about what makes GoldenEye great without talking about the Bond actor himself, Pierce Brosnan, and how he hit it out of the park with his first go at the role. Brosnan was actually casted as Bond about a decade prior to GoldenEye. He was supposed to debut in The Living Daylights, but when the show he was in at the time, Remington Steele, renewed his contract, Brosnan was contractually obligated to quit Bond, and Timothy Dalton stepped in. Of course, Brosnan himself was devastated. He was a major Bond fan, with having seen Goldfinger in theaters, and that movie being his inspiration to act. Could you imagine getting your dream job, only for your previous job to have it vetoed immediately? Man, that had to suck. When he got this miraculous second chance, though, Brosnan came in giving his performance as James Bond everything he could. With the cold open, we see a James Bond who is experienced, cool under pressure, level-headed even when angered, and resourceful when he seems to be out of options, and he only gets better as the movie progresses. Before Brosnan, I think Roger Moore would have been in most people's minds the most charming Bond. Brosnan decided to give him a run for his money. And like Dalton, Brosnan also got to show the effects of James Bond's line of work on a person, but he also realizes that it must be done.
How can you act like this? How can you be so cold?
It's what keeps me alive.
Most Bond actors have to wait until their third movie is out for most audiences to believe their interpretation of James Bond. Pierce Brosnan sold everyone with his first one. Let's talk about another staple of this masterpiece. This movie has, in my opinion, the best ensemble of villains out of all 25 official Bond movies. Here, there are four main villains who lead the Yanis Syndicate. General Orumov is the man who seemingly kills 006 in the opening. Under the Iron Curtain, he is smug, especially when he thinks he's gonna win.
You can't win.
He also doesn't take insubordination well, as he takes out a trigger-happy guard who loses control after warning his men not to do so. When we catch up to him in the modern time, he's still confident in using his position in the Russian military to help further Yanis' goals, commanding guards to kill Bond, or using his clearance to steal the GoldenEye. He doesn't seem to enjoy his cohort's methods, but when he finally sees what Bond is capable of, he begins to lose it, drinking and becoming more frantic.
Use a bumper! That's what it's for!
Xenia Onatopp is a memorable addition to the Bond rogues gallery, like Jaws or Oddjob before her. She's not the first female baddie of the series. Heck, she's not even the first tough chick Bond has faced. Anybody remember Mayday from A View to a Kill? She is, however, potent. Here's an assassin who gets off on murder. No, really. This is her reaction to blowing away a room of innocent programmers. Did you see the look on Arumov's face? Even he doesn't know what to think of her. Her favorite way to take out a target is with sex. Again, really. Earlier in the movie, she takes out a Canadian admiral using her thighs to suffocate him, and later tries it on Bond. Twice! Xenia is not only terrifying, but she's an absolute blast to watch. Famke Janssen really shows how much fun she's having in the role, and you can't help but look forward to her scenes, even if she's evil. The term femme fatale wasn't invented by Xenia, but she's certainly the de facto definition. Beautiful, but she'll take you out with a smile on her face. For the technical side, we have Boris Grishenko, played by Alan Cumming. Boris is a brilliant sleaze who enjoys hacking into the US government for laughs and his twisted riddles.
They're right in front of you and can open very large doors.
You're such a geek.
It's unknown to us if he was part of Yanis all along, or was recruited when Arumov and Xenia steal the GoldenEye key. I think that was my assessment. Arumov's dialogue with the Russian defense minister suggests that Boris's survival was planned.
And what of the two missing Severnaya technicians?
I was aware only of the one, Boris Grishenko.
Like Arumov, he's pretty smug, but unlike his ally, he's loud about it. He wants people to know what he did and how brilliant he is. If you need more convincing on how full of himself he is, here's his catchphrase.
I am invincible!
From how I see it, he's also the only Bond villain whose main rival isn't Bond himself, but the Bond girl, Natalia. I'll talk about her later. And finally, the head honcho himself. Let's talk about another one of the greatest Bond villains to be put to screen. Alec Trallion. The Bond series is no stranger to facing Bond against what could be seen as an evil version of himself. Red Grant, Silva, and Scaramanga come to mind, but here is a villain who finally fits the bill. Trallion has the exact same training, knowledge of MI6 tactics and gear, and even charm as James Bond does. He even knows how to put together an effective crew like Bond did in License to Kill, just on a bigger scale. Just like 007, he's an orphan. The only difference lies in how they became orphans.
We're both orphans, James. But where your parents had the luxury of dying in a climbing accident, mine survived the British betrayal and Stalin's execution squads. But my father couldn't let himself or my mother live with the shame of it. MI6 figured I was too young to remember. And in one of life's little ironies, the son went to work for the government whose betrayal caused the father to kill himself and his wife.
If you skip that history lesson, I suggest googling what the Leon's Cossacks were. But the movie does a decent job relaying this with a scene between Bond and ex-KGB agent Valentin Zukovsky, played by the late great Robbie Coltrane. And when Trallion and Bond finally have that final fight, it's brutal. Even rivaling the fight between Bond and Red Grant and many of Daniel Craig's Bond fights, both men are fighting with familiarity and rage, doing everything to get the upper hand against their former comrade. I won't talk about how it ends, but if you're looking for an interesting villain demise and Bond one-liner, this movie has it. As for the Bond girl of this movie, we get Russian programmer Natalia Simonova. She carries a lot of the pathos of the movie, as she is the sole survivor of Xenia and Arumov's theft of the GoldenEye, and even survives the blast, showing the audience what's really at stake if the GoldenEye is used again. Not only does she lose her friends, but she finds herself paranoid at the knowledge of being hunted by the two again. She gets betrayed by Boris, who happily baits her into getting captured and nearly killed. You really feel for this character. And unlike most Bond girls, we see an arc to her and Bond's relationship in the movie. The two only first meet after both are set to be blown up in the stolen EMP-hardened helicopter, and even after Bond narrowly saves them, she's not keen on meeting him. It takes Bond saving her a couple more times, including the tank chase, for her to finally warm up to 007. She even takes a few courses in badassery by the time the ending rolls around. She attacks Xenia straight on, giving Bond enough time to stop her.
Wait for your turn.
Disables the GoldenEye satellite, bitch slaps Boris.
Natalia!
And finally, holds a Yanis helicopter pilot at gunpoint to rescue Bond once again. Although she isn't my favorite Bond girl, she'd be on my top 10 list if I made one for that. Like with Skyfall, there's really not a whole lot that I'd complain about with this movie. I know you're probably expecting me to list Eric Serra's score, but I don't know, over the years it kind of grew on me. What can I say? To me, GoldenEye not only saved the Bond franchise, but it is the essential James Bond movie and my favorite out of the series.
For England, James? No.
And there you have it, my top 10 favorite James Bond movies. Do you have a top 10 in the series? I'd be interested in comparing my choices with yours. You know the drill. Type them below in the comments. This has been a fun experiment. Thank you for all of you watching my streams who suggested it. I'll be back with another video, hopefully before too long, so stay tuned. Once again, I'm Ginger Wolf, you're awesome, and I'll see you next time.
This is Solid Snake. Thank you for watching Ginger Wolf's video. Ginger Wolf, huh? Huh. Sounds like one of Liquid's men. Liquid! Anyway, if you liked what you saw, hit the like and subscribe buttons, or I'm gonna have to use some CQC on you. And I don't think either of us want that. Snake out.